Israel has an absolute and unequivocal right and responsibility to defend itself to the fullest, applying the only language that its adversaries understand, the language of force. So what would David Ben-Gurion say today? He would say, don't depend on anybody else's fleeting sympathies or permission to do it. If Israel wants to destroy Hamas, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hamas.
So it's 2026, it's an election year, and Vivek Ramaswamy, remember him? He ran for president back in 2024. Vivek Ramaswamy is running for governor of Ohio. In fact, he's the lead Republican candidate. He's received by far the most endorsements from everyone from President Trump to Elon Musk to Charlie Kirk to trade unions. He's really the lead dog. And if he wins the Republican nomination, he will very likely be the governor of Ohio, because over the course of the last few election cycles, Ohio has turned pretty ruby red. It's a Republican state. And thinking about Vivek Ramaswamy got me thinking about a speech that he gave about Israel while he was running for president. And there's some stuff in that speech. I went back and listened to it that is really, looking at it now, a year and a half later after he gave it, it's pretty relevant to today, maybe even more than when he said it at the time. So let's take a look at Vivek on Israel from 2024. Have a look.
For Israel to return to its founding premise. The Jewish state has an absolute right to exist. A divine gift, gifted to a divine nation, charged with a divine purpose. Israel has an absolute and unequivocal right and responsibility to defend itself to the fullest, applying the only language that its adversaries understand, the language of force. So what would David Ben-Gurion say today? He would say, don't depend on anybody else's fleeting sympathies or permission to do it. If Israel wants to destroy Hamas, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hamas. I'm just getting started. If Israel wants to destroy Hezbollah, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hezbollah. If Israel and Mossad want to pull off Munich 2.0 and take out every last leader of Hamas, wherever they may be hiding, from Doha to Dresden, host a red wedding at the Four Seasons in Qatar, the next time Haniyeh and Mashal show up, they should go ahead and do it. If Israel wants to, at long last, abandon the myth of a two-state solution, Israel should go ahead and abandon a two-state solution. The rest of the Arab world can absorb Palestinians just as the Jews absorbed their people out of 22 countries they were kicked out of since 1948. The Islamic world cannot continue to condone the slaughtering of Jews while continuing to disown the Palestinians. That is the hard truth, that neither member of either political party is willing to speak out loud to the Arab world. I will. But these are decisions for Israel to make, not America. I am not running for president of Israel. I am running for president of the United States. And just as it is time for Israel to return to its founding premise, it is time for us here in the U.S. to return to ours.
Israel's founding premise, really a beautiful phrase. And it was so on point to invoke Ben-Gurion when talking about Israel's founding premise, because Israel's founding premise, the founding premise of modern Zionism, and I'm not talking about religious Zionism based in biblical faith, but the founding premise of modern political Zionism is simply that the Jewish people were not safe in other countries in the world, living by the goodwill of host nations. And that's what Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, realized when he saw what was happening in the Dreyfus trial in Europe. And that's what David Ben-Gurion realized. And that's what the founders of the state of Israel all realized, that Jews need to have their own state. They need to be able to defend themselves. And again, not be beholden to the goodwill of others. But what happened over the decades is that the state of Israel itself as a state became beholden to the goodwill of others. Most notably, over the course of the last 45 years or so, Israel, a little more than that, Israel has become increasingly dependent on the United States. The foreign aid from the United States to Israel has gotten ramped up numerous times, always as an incentive or as a concession when Israel has made their own security concessions. When Israel gave up the Sinai Desert in the 1979 Camp David Accords, that was when they got the first large amounts of military aid from the United States, the first amount of foreign aid, and that was as a concession to basically say, okay, you've surrendered vital security assets, we're going to give you some aid. But what happened over the decades is that Israel became increasingly dependent on the United States, and the reality that most of us have grown up with and gotten used to is that Israel has to kind of tether its decisions to American policy and ask permission. But it wasn't always like that. Before the 1970s, from Israel's founding, Israel wasn't really a close ally of the United States at all. I mean, it dealt with America, it dealt with other countries as well. It didn't get foreign aid. The U.S. behaved kind of like a neutral party in the Middle East, other than the fact that President Truman was the first head of state to recognize the state of Israel when it was founded. For a few decades after that, America wasn't really that close a friend of Israel, and Israel made its own decisions. It was much more independent. It was also being governed by a generation of people who lived through the generations of the Holocaust and the pogroms in Europe. And there was a sense that people like Ben Gurion, there was a sense, a much stronger sense that we cannot rely on anybody and we need to look out for ourselves. And Israel kind of got away from that. And after October 7th, the Israeli public and the Jewish people around the world really have rediscovered that ethos that we need to be more independent. Now, of course, having all this foreign aid and being tethered to American policy is something that needs to be unwound. And thank God, recently, Prime Minister Netanyahu has started openly saying that it is a goal of Israel to draw down the aid, to end U.S. aid to Israel. And that's not only because we don't need it anymore economically. Israel's economy is booming, but it also has to do with the fact that the aid to Israel has been used as leverage over Israel's decision-making. Early in this war, after October 7th, the Biden administration that was still in power was tying Israel's hands in all kinds of ways and withholding certain equipment. And that was all leverage that is not healthy for Israel to have hanging over it. So this approach of Vivek Ramaswamy basically saying, look, Israel needs to make decisions the way any nation makes decisions in its own self-interest. And that's really the essence of nationalism. And, you know, people often think of America first as something that is not consistent with being pro-Israel. The America first term has been disparaged, and most notably by the ADL, saying that it's a problematic term because it's been used by people who are anti-Israel and super isolationist in the past. But what Vivek Ramaswamy is saying is, look, it's not America's place to be telling Israel what its decision-making should be. Israel needs to be independent and make its own choices. And the heck with the Arab world. If the Muslim world doesn't like it, the Arab world doesn't like it, that's their problem. They could deal with that. And this might also be coming from the fact that Vivek is a Hindu, and the Hindus have been slaughtered, massacred for centuries by Muslims. The Hindus have suffered at the hand of the Muslims, and they have no love for them. And he's basically saying, look, this is historical reality. Jews were exiled from the Arab world when the state of Israel was founded. The state of Israel took all those people in. They left their possessions behind. Hundreds of thousands of Jews, they left their possessions behind in the Arab world where they were kicked out. No one ever cried about that for decade after decade, calling themselves refugees. And right now, in order for there to be peace and security in Israel, in the Middle East, we need to end this whole prospect of a two-state solution. It's also amazing in this speech. You see there, he mentioned that if Israel wants to go ahead and carry out strikes in Doha, in Qatar, in a hotel there, next time the Hamas leadership is there, they should go ahead and do it. That's pretty amazing that he said that back during the 2024 campaign, where, we all remember over the course of last year where Israel actually did carry out airstrikes in Qatar, trying to kill Hamas leadership. But it's also very relevant, everything he said in this speech to the way Israel's been behaving recently, because Israel has rediscovered this sense of independence. And you see it in policy. You see a couple notable examples are, Syria, where Israel took some territory that's vital to its own security. It also took action to defend and protect the Druze and Christian minorities in Syria, carried out airstrikes when the Syrians were trying to rebuild their air defenses. And they didn't ask the U.S. permission, and the U.S. wasn't even necessarily happy with these actions, but Israel went ahead and took action. Or in the Gaza Strip, where the United States has been pressuring Israel to accept Turkish forces to come in as part of the International Stabilization Force, and Israel said no. They vetoed that. Israel is much more bold now about asserting itself diplomatically. Israel recognized Somaliland. The United States hasn't recognized them yet. Israel's asserting itself in the region, being much more independent, looking out for its own interests. So again, America first and pro-Israel can go together very nicely, as you see here in Vivek Ramaswamy's approach, that America should not be telling other nations what to do. That's part of what America first means. You have strong allies who can work with you. But this speech is so relevant to everything that we're seeing now today. It also brings to mind the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu, his name for this war, the war since October 7th was called Swords of Iron, which is kind of a name that doesn't really mean anything. But Prime Minister Netanyahu, midway through the war, said that he wanted to change the name of the war. And some people use it, most people don't. But the name that he wanted to give it is in Hebrew, Milchemet HaTkuma. Tkuma means a rise, meaning a rebirth, a renaissance, like the war of Israel's rebirth. Or I'll put it in my own terms. I consider this war to be Israel's second war of independence. There was the War of Independence in 1947 and 48 that Israel fought for its independence. But then Israel became very dependent. It became very dependent on the U.S. and on other powers. And through the course of the last 2+ years since October 7th, what we have seen is Israel asserting itself, being more independent. So I consider this, again, Israel's second war of independence. So Vivek Ramaswamy, probably going to be the next governor of Ohio. And obviously a great friend of Israel based on these remarks that he gave all the way back in 2024.